in on the council buses. A couple of items before we get rolling. Just remind you, we've got the photo competition coming along. So start thinking about your photograph to come in for the photo competition. Still a little bit of time to roll yet on that, but good prizes as again like we had last year. So,
yep.
So before Rafferty sort of starts on thing, just a couple of other little things to sort of mention to you. Our last meeting here with David Carson's, remember, and something came out of that afterward, believe it or not. I was reading a book called Lying to the Admiralty. And it's a very good book, actually, probably the best book I've read about Captain Cook, actually. And I'll just sort of read you a little bit out of that part there, which connects to our last presentation that we had. James Cook, early spring of 1758, made his first crossing in the HMS Pembroke to Canada Way, okay? Arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was the ice-free port for the Royal Navy's North American station. Now, at this point, less than 3 months after setting foot in America, James Cook had another stroke of luck. A couple of days after the capture of Louisbourg, he was ashore at a nearby cove when he noticed an army officer working at the other end of the beach. The man was manipulating a strange-looking apparatus on a tripod, and Cook, ever curious, approached him. This was Lieutenant Samuel Holland, an engineer in the Royal Americans, previously the Dutch artillery, born and bred in the Netherlands. He had migrated to Britain 4 years earlier, bringing with him the latest practice of scientific military cartography. It was Holland who had recognised the coast before Captain Wolfe in his bombardment of Louisbourg. Holland was the same age as Cook, and like Cook, he was brave, brilliant and ambitious. He was also well educated, a fine linguist and a talented mathematician. Holland's device was a plane table, which allowed surveyors to measure angles and plot them directly onto a piece of paper while out in the field. He gave Cook a demonstration, but didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, the generous Dutchman tutored Cook in draftsmanship and taught him all the best surveying techniques. It was a turning point in Cook's life. He was hooked. He had learned some elementary charting skills when he worked for Walker Brothers at Whitby, but now under Holland's instructions, he became professional. Cook had found his calling as a nautical surveyor and cartographer, and Holland's instruction was well timed. From 1759, it was obligatory for captains and masters of naval ships to record useful information whenever they got close to an unfamiliar shore. They were given a remark book, which they had to fill in with observations of bays and landmarks, shoals and soundings, tides and bearings. This instruction from the Admiralty was prompted by the Navy's desperate need for accurate charts of French and Canadian coasts during the 7 Years' War. Master Cook would now supplement his remarkable work with increasing proficient charts. So from plane table we basically had last week, that was a big thing discovering Cook in his life to find out a plane table. And you know from our talk last week, the early progress that was. And of course, we know the charts that, of course, Captain Cook ended up with as he went. And Lying to the Admiralty was a good book. Some of his charts, which the public were never going to see, he was criticised after his voyage because they reckon he, for such a navigator and that, his charts were lousy, but they were done on purpose because he was lying for the Admiralty. So, you know, he made sure that he left important things off the maps that the public would see, so the French and everybody else wouldn't know of their discoveries. So it was part of his job to lie for the Admiralty, sort of thing. But, so a great book if you find it, Lying for the Admiralty. So turning on to today's presentation that Rafferty's going to do, I was involved just in the beginning of this on the first day out with a couple of uni students to decide on where they would walk and things like that. So my connection with Binna Burra goes back a little bit, and I'll leave a couple of things on the table here to have a look at. I first went to Binna Burra in December '64, and I kept a notebook even those days. So that's what I did on each day of the 17 days I was at Binna Burra. That's the walk that I did on those days at Binna Burra and the things that I did. And also there's the Christmas menu from 1964 at Binna Burra. That was Christmas menu. So in the typical fashion, they wrote it in quite a funny sort of version, the way describing the meals and things like that. You know, like it says, roasted scrub turkey. Don't tell Gus, he was the ranger. See, don't tell Gus, things like that. And every morning on the table, they had what they call the order of the day. They would suggest a walk for you to go on, and then they would come around to the breakfast table, take your name down, and then if you're all going to, say, Dave's Creek, and there was 8 of you, they'd pack a lunch for you for 8 people to go walking for the day. And so they were some of the things that, what they set out at Binna Burra in those early days. and that's a very early brochure advertising for Binna Burra. If you do pull it out of the folder, be gentle with it. It's sort of getting on a little bit, sort of thing, but it's got some early black and white photographs of Binna Burra and the area. I'll leave this one here too. No free lunch, it's called. That explains itself pretty well. It's all about laying the pipeline for the water supply for Binna Burra. Back in 1969, the volunteers who dragged the pipes all the way through the forest to the Coomera to be able to supply water. So Peter Atwood, a good friend of mine, wrote that up at the time, sort of thing. And one of the walks that Rafferty will mention today was the Census Trail, and that's the original brochure that was handed out for the Census Trail, which was one of the walks around the lodge. I've taken enough of your time there, so pass it over to Rafferty to give us an explanation of the study. Thank you, Rafferty.
Got to put this on. Oops. Bit hard to get on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Can you hear me? No. It's not on. Making a noise. Maybe I should put it in sort of. There. How's that? Can you hear me there? Still not. Where you put it, isn't it? On the right side. How about that?
No, it just fell off.
Oh, well,
Put it on the right side, Rafferty, right side, because you look at the slide.
hello. Hello. Oh, well, thanks, Neville. Now, Neville's here, and as you'll see, he was involved in the first part of this project. But of course, Neville knows a lot more about Binna Burra than I do. So I've invited him to comment certainly on some of the aspects that we'll cover today. But thank you for coming. And this was a scientific study. So I'm going to move along. As you know, many of you have been involved in past scientific studies that the Society has done. And there's the list of the ones that we've done in the past. However, with COVID, when it came along, the distances involved in some of these scientific studies, and also the Society was going through big changes when we moved. There wasn't a lot of financial resources to do a really big one. So all of those things meant that we couldn't really look at doing a similar one last year. So we ended up doing this one, which was mapping some of the trails at Binna Burra, of course, much closer distance-wise, and it didn't cost much at all, so as you'll hear. So that's why we did this one as a scientific study with the committee there. Okay, so just a quick refresh. I'm sure you know this, but the linkages between Binna Burra and RGSQ go back a long way. You may recall the name of Robert Collins, who was the president of our society in the late 1800s. Romeo Lay also later, but he was a member of the RGSQ, or as it was then, the Australasian Society then. And Collins, Lay, and Arthur Groom, the founder of Binna Burra, co-founder, I should say, they initiated, as you may know, the establishment of the NPAQ, National Parks Association of Queensland. So there's a link with our presidents and members in the formation of national parks. And of course, later, Binna Burra lands were incorporated into around that area in the national park, although private land. Many of you I know have also got your own individual stories, experiences, connections of Binna Burra. And as I mentioned, of course, Neville is one of our key people there who's had a long association with matters at Binna Burra. And now, going right up to the present, Steve Noakes, who's many of you may have met, he's the chair of Binna Burra Lodge, and he sponsors our photo competition with the first prize. And by the way, please remember, get your photos ready. The competition will open again on the 1st of September and close on October 31st. So don't be shy, put your photos in.
Is it only Queensland?
Only Queensland, yes. Wow. Yes, because we are a Queensland society, yeah. And don't be fazed by the ABC weather photos as well. Although I noticed last night on the ABC their calendars come out, so we might look at that for our third prize this year. All right, so anyway, moving on. So as you know, Binna Burra was devastated in 2019 by the bushfire that swept through there. The lodge was destroyed. This is the 8th of September. Fortunately, Groom's Cottage and the tea house, as it was then, they escaped the fire. For some reason, it just really took through a swathe around the lodge. And there's a photo of on the 8th of September and the photo on the 9th of September. So as you know, it was devastating. And what it looks like at the moment here, this is the top where the lodge used to be, but they've got funding and design, and they hope to begin construction of the new lodge later this year, maybe even next month. Not quite sure how they're up to with that. But the result of the fire was that Binna Burra was cut off for more than a year, actually, and while they did all that clearing of debris. And Neville was just telling me before, he helped after the fire to clear a bit of it. There was ash up to his knees. So it was a big job. And also there were landslides on the road leading up. So it was a major task to get Binna Burra open again. But thankfully, again, as I said, the Groom's Cottage, the old cottage, was saved. And the tea house, as you may know if you've been up there recently, has been renovated and added on and so on. So it's looking good now. So what about the walking tracks after the fire? There's some photos that you would have seen. And one of the major things after the fire, because there was no track maintenance, obviously, and those 2 summers, there were good rains. So there was a lot of regrowth of vegetation took place on the tracks, as you can see here, and including stinging trees. Lots of stinging trees came up, and invasive weed species, and also there were some landslides that blocked some paths right up near the lodge area, and so that obviously the trails closed for some time to the public. So what about our project? What did we do? Sorry, keep going there. So one of the reasons, in talking to Steve Noakes, it was actually at a Christmas party here the year before, so Christmas party 2021, I think. He said that, well, actually the brochures that visitors pick up in the little tea house, those maps there are not really that great with the trails. They're a bit inaccurate. They are NPAQ brochures, but the maps for the trails of Binna Burra and the surrounds actually are not that accurate. They're good, but could do better. So they said, well, it would be nice if we had some new accurate maps for visitors. So that started it off, and we formed up a partnership with RGSQ, Binna Burra Lodge. We had support from the UQ School of Earth and Environmental Sciences. And so our aims were to map more accurately the existing trails that had been damaged, and also to assess locations for some possible future trails at Binna Burra, which I'll mention a bit later. Again, Steve Noakes had said, well, we are thinking about doing such and such. So that was part of our purview to do then. So on the 20th of July last year, the team, and here we are here, looking around a mapping table at Binna Burra, Ralph, myself, Phil Gidley, who's one of the students, Neville, and Giselle from our council, went up there to basically to form up what we're going to do in the project. And Tim Medhurst here, he's the Binna Burra Lodge Development and Infrastructure Senior Officer. He was so helpful, and he explained on that day, you know, where the walking tracks were. He took us around, showed us the entrances, the starts of most of the tracks that we might be looking at. He also showed us where the new tiny wild houses were going to be, because they weren't built at that stage. So Tim was really helpful in showing us around. It was freezing cold, July, wasn't it? Didn't rain, I think, but it was freezing cold. So the next thing was we planned, and we did a 3-day field work at Binna Burra in August, and we didn't all stay. The students, of course, were the main ones. So there was our team, including Annie, our treasurer here, and the other student was Verinda. So Philip and Verinda were both RGS members, student members, but they were doing their 3rd year in geographical sciences at the UQ. And so they did this project, the mapping and the field work, as a credit for their course at the UQ. And then that was a research topic course, and Annie and I assessed them and supervised them in that. Tim Medhurst again guided us during this, well, on one of the days, the 3-day, and then showed the students what they were going to do and us, and he left them then the next 2 days. But again, he was so helpful, and you can see Tim here with Philip and Brenda. And Binna Burra Lodge came through and helped us. Again, that's why this particular project was really low cost, because Binna Burra provided us with the accommodation in the bunkhouse, which is here. It's not salubrious, and it didn't have any heating, so they had to take their own blankets and sleeping bags. But it was okay, dry and so on. And it's right next door to, again, if you've been there recently, the Groom's Cottage now has the bar, and it's a barbecue area at the back there. So that Binna Burra provided the students and us, when we were there, with meals, either at the cottage in the barbecue area, or very nice dinner, couple of dinners in the tea house at night. So that was much appreciated. Again, it really helped with keeping the cost down to do all this. So what conditions did we encounter on the tracks? A bit of uphill climbing and bush bashing, trying to avoid the stinging trees. In fact, Annie, as our treasurer, it was her first experience encountering a stinging tree. She got stung on her hand. What's this? And we explained she'd touched a stinging tree. It was the paths, of course, were quite overgrown, lots of boulders, and Brenda saying they're glad I brought my sticks. And sometimes we weren't really sure where one trail ended and the next one, where were we supposed to go, even though we had the GPS and the maps and so on. So it wasn't an easy sort of trail walk by any means. But we managed. So how did they do their work? They each had a handheld GPS, these two here. and they recorded separately. About every 3 seconds, data would come in where they were, and that was the location. They also recorded the condition at the point of the trails. So quite a lot of data was collected. They walked most of the walking trails over the 3 days. So you probably can't see here, but all of these tracks are there. So the Census track and the Lodge Loop, Sky Lodge track, which is a very short one down to the new Sky Lodges. Caroline track, I'm not sure where that is, Neville, do you know?
Basically near the Sky Lodge track.
Near the Sky Lodge, okay, they did that one separately. The Possum Trail, the Garden and Cliff tracks, parts of Bellbird Circuit and the Horse track. So they are all marked on that map there. So it was 9 that they did over the 3 days. And there they are, sort of with their GPSs and trying to figure out, you know, the locations on the paper map as well. They also did they mapped the first 200 meters of the Caves Circuit track, which does have an entrance at the site of Binna Burra Lodge, as you may know, but then it goes off into the national park. So we were only we were only doing Binna Burra lands, because if we'd gone into the national park to do this more, we would have had to have negotiated with national parks to get permission, etc. It would have taken a long time. So we decided, no, we'll just stick with Binna Burra lands. Okay, what did they find? So, you know, for most of the trails, there were only 2 at the time that were open. The Possum track and the Garden track were open in 2022. Lots of obstructions, as you can see there. Those 2 were mostly clear, but, you know, there was some stinging nettles and various overgrowth. All the others were, you know, as you saw in those pictures, quite overgrown, difficult. So they, again, decided to have a sort of rating of what would be needed to restore the trails. And as you can see, quite a bit of work would have been needed from what they found. If you've got any questions, by the way, please ask. Okay, so the other things that they used for the thing, they had access to data sets from the Queensland Spatial Catalogue. They used some satellite imagery. Department of Resources 1 metre contours, property boundaries from the Queensland cadastral layer. And Binna Burra had actually commissioned a formal surveying of the area because of the redevelopment work that they were going to be doing. So the students were able to geo-reference their studies, their data with that diagram as well, which helped during their field work. So, okay, they've done their field work. That was the 3-day thing. They've got the data on those GPSs. The next step was to transfer it onto a computer. So they had a laptop. So all the collected data were imported into a GPS using QGIS, which some of you may know, the software package that does this, onto the laptop to create the new maps. They averaged data from the 2 GPSs because there were some minor variations with the 2. Like, for example, going up steep topography and dense rainforest canopy. So the 2 sets of data were slightly different. So they averaged that to, counter those differences. They made digital elevation models of the areas using the 1 metre contours that they'd got. They did terrain profiles, especially for the new tracks, which I'll tell you about in a minute, using something called the plug-in profile tool on QGIS software. And Philip in particular did gradient profiles for the new potential trails that he was he was suggesting or looking at. Okay, so Philip, I'll just tell you now a little bit more about the two reports, because the two students worked together and independently. They had to submit their own report to get the credit for the work they'd done. So, and their reports are slightly different. They, of course, started off with the same methodology and data collection fieldwork stuff, but from there they diverged a bit and did their own thing. So Philip Gidley actually was very familiar with Binna Burra through many years of scouting. And as it turned out, he was in the same scouting group as our daughters, which I didn't know at the time, but that was good. He'd spent many years walking around Binna Burra, so he was really good at doing this. He said, oh, this is, even if I wasn't doing it for credit, I'd like to do this anyway, because he really loved doing that sort of thing. But his maps were more technical than Verinda's, so that was his forte. So he did map existing trails, and also though he looked up and mapped a few areas where they could put new trails. So Philip's work proposed new trails. First of all, because of the new Binna Burra master plan, which I'll show you right at the end, but I think those of you who went to Binna Burra that day and heard the talk by, was it Tim? He showed you and went through what they were planning. Lots of new things going on at Binna Burra. And one of them is an adventure precinct, which is away from the tea house and the main lodge and so on. It's down near the cliffs. But so they need a new trail to go from that main area, the hub, down to the adventure precinct. So Philip did some investigation and looked at some possibilities for that trail. He looked at the census trail, but never mentioned, because that had been badly damaged in the fire, and there was actually a landslide in that area, so it had to be redone. But the existing one wasn't any good for wheelchairs anyway. So Philip looked at two new routes for a census trail, and came up with a couple of solutions that they might investigate for the census trail. And then also another new trail from the cave circuit entry. He looked at that. It really wasn't very successful, but to the saddle clearing. So that, because if you, as you know, many of you would have done Bob's Caves walk. You know, you often come back via the road. Well, Binna Burra doesn't really like that, people walking along the road. So Philip was charged to look at, okay, is there another way we can extend that bit of the trail to get people back to Binna Burra without walking along the road? Because it is a bit of a safety hazard, groups walking along that road. So those were the three new trails that Philip looked at. So here's his work, options. This is for the connection tracks. So the first descent is the green one. It's this one here. It's quite circuitous, but it leads down to this area, which is going to be developed as the adventure precinct, to the horse track, it says there. The second one is the red, and that goes like this, all the way around. It's 55 meters, and the bright green was the third option. That's this one, again, quite circuitous, but if people are going on an adventure, they don't mind walking, I presume. That was the closest to the desired target of a gradient, less than 10%. So that was part of his work, and you can see here, this is the gradient profile that Philip developed to show those three possible trials. And as you can see, the bright green is the least steep. So he was recommending, if they were going to do it, that's the one. And in fact, a week or so ago, I did check whether what's happening at the moment, they're still negotiating with the company that's going to develop the adventure precinct and everything they're going to put there. And that trail, he had, Tim Medhurst had sent the Phillips diagram of that trail to them, and they thought they'd probably use that when they get the adventure precinct up. So it was good to hear that, you know, their work might be used. Okay, Census Trail. Again, this one badly damaged after the fire, but he was able to find two fairly flat areas that could be viable for wheelchair access as well. So the yellow one, not quite as easy to see, but it's here. And the green one, which is here, different spots, but again, a census trail. And again, he did the elevation profiles. As you can see, they're fairly flat, so that would be good. And of course, they'd have to make it, you know, some sort of surface to allow wheelchairs as well as other visually handicapped people. Okay, and then the Caves link track. Again, this is the one that, you know, they said, well, we don't like people walking on the road. Can you look at doing another track which gets them back? But this one, I think, probably is not going to happen anytime soon. First of all, the blue line here, a straight line, but it was elevation to be gained 95 meters straight, so probably not good. Second one, the pink line, this one, circuitous, but again, winding. It was again outside the recommended range of gradients. The only one that he thought could work would be quite long. It was again a 10% gradient, but it was almost 1 kilometre long. And they thought it's probably unlikely to be feasible in the small area that is required to get people back to Binna Burra. So not quite sure what is happening with that one. And there's the gradients of them. That blue one, very, very steep. And you may be familiar with that. And again, if anyone's got any comments on that, maybe later. So again, that was Philip's work, quite technical, using his skills with the software to produce the maps, the gradients, look at terrain profiles and so on. Again, their course at the UQ, they both had quite a lot of GIS coursework, so they were both quite familiar with that. Okay, Brenda's work was a little bit different. So again, they both did together the field work, and both of their reports at the beginning went through, you know, why they were doing this, the methodology they used in the field work, and so on, and the maps that they had produced from the field work. But Brenda's focus was more sort of historical as well. So she called her report A Walk Through Time at Binna Burra, Past and Current Walking Tracks at Binna Burra. So hers was a bit different. So what she did was brief narratives, which we thought, and Tim Medhurst and Steve Noakes thought this was a good idea. Once they got the new maps on the brochures, which they will print eventually, on the back of the brochures, they'd have little stories about the trails, you know, why they developed, a bit of the history about those trails. And that was to give insight into the history, the legacy, significance of Binna Burra Lodge. And to get those stories, she sourced them from both published archives and personal accounts. So that was Brenda's extra work. So she did acknowledge, first of all, of course, the traditional custodians, because Binna Burra land is on the land of various tribes, the Duggan, Balloon, Five Rivers peoples. And in their language, the main language, Ugumbe language, Binna Burra meant a place of beech trees, where the beech trees grow. And you may know the name Woonungura, which was the Yugambeh name for Binna Burra Mountains. So she had checked all this. And as you may know, there's various evidence around Binna Burra of the Aboriginal occupation of the area. And one of them, of course, is the cooking cave along the caves track, the Queebani cooking cave. So actually, Romeo Lay had proposed way back when they were putting together the national park that they used the Aboriginal word name Woonungura for this area for the park. But of course, it became named after Lord Lamington National Park. But recently that's changed, and now the national park does incorporate the Aboriginal name. It's still Lamington, but they incorporate Woonungura into the name. If you go on their website, it has stuff about that as well as Lamington. And Binna Burra does have a reconciliation plan, and those yellow lines, not very accurate according to Tim Medhurst and Steve, but they are supposedly tracks that the Indigenous peoples in the area did use. So that Binna Burra has this document, which is a reconciliation plan, consulting with local elders and so on. It seems they didn't actually spend much time up there, but they went up there to gather food and that cooking cave and so on. They didn't actually live up there for very long, apparently. So that was an interesting part of Verinda's work as well. And then again, very interesting, and again, Neville was very helpful in introducing us to Richard Groom, who's I think an old friend of Neville's, but he's the youngest son of Arthur Groom, who established Binna Burra. He's still around. Richard is now in his 80s, and he agreed to come and talk to us on the 26th of October. Verinda and I met Richard here, and he spent over an hour talking to us. It was great, about his recollections, personal recollections, key moments in the history of Binna Burra, and he and why and how some of the trails were developed. And he gave us this hand-drawn map from the 1930s, his recollections of what was there. So we have a copy of that in the report from Binda. It was really very interesting talking to him. So he's got here plan view, Mount Roberts, and all the things that were there in the 1930s, some of which are no longer there, of course, but some of them are still existing under other names. So that was really a good source of information. He also, many of you may know this book, Harry Throssell's book, Where the Beech Trees Grow, the story of Binna Burra. And it's a detailed account of the formation and development of Binna Burra Lodge. I think, do we have a copy in the library here? You know, I think we should. I think so, yeah. If you're interested, it detailed short and longer walks in the 1980s, early 80s, and also explained which were simple walks and more difficult walks. So she had a look at that too. So the next thing she did was, in her report, give examples of a few of the trails, some of these stories about, you know, each of the trails. So the first one, Bellbird Lookout Trail, and here's the lookout. It was one of the first tracks to be marked and developed, and that was in preparation for the first Christmas camp in 1933. It was a bit before your time. And now parts of this track also lie within the boundary of national parks, so a little bit outside Binna Burra lands. So that was the Bellbird Lookout. I think that also now is close to where they put the new tiny wild houses down there. So there's I think they were having 6. I think they were planning 6. They've got at least 3. When you go on to Binna Burra's website, you can look accommodation. You can see these, what they're calling tiny wild houses, and they all have a big open view of this view on one side of the thing. They sort of look a bit like containers, but they're self-contained with one room, a bedroom, double bed, and a kitchen, bathroom. They're self-contained around that area now, so they're interesting to look at.
So roughly, I believe they can be moved.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kay. They made them specifically so that they could be moved. If there is another fire, they can move them out to safety. So I guess they're on sort of rollers eventually if they need to be. Yes, thank you for that comment. That's interesting with thinking about the fire risk that's there, that they're very familiar with, of course, now. So that's Bellbird Lookout Trail. The horse trail is interesting, and you can only just see it here. There's the label Horse Trail, and that was the track as it was when we did the field work. So not very accessible at that time. And here's the sign going back to Binna Burra Lodge. So the horse trail has an interesting history. Arthur Groom envisaged horse riding for guests at Binna Burra in the 1960s for visitors and guests. It was a unique experience because horses were banned next door in the national park. But because Binna Burra was private land, they could have the horse riding there on the grounds. So it was quite a unique experience for visitors as riding through the rainforest. And the main trail for horse riding started at the Garden Trail, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It ran along south-western fence of the veggie garden, which is now overgrown. So you can still walk along this horse trail, but it's slightly different from the original one. And it joined Bellbird Lookout to the main Bellbird clearing up there. Okay, the Garden Trail, which is a bit more of an open area. So when Binna Burra Lodge was founded in 1933, and they had that first Christmas camp up there, there was no vehicle access. Romeo Lay had, though, built a flying fox, which was in operation from 1934 to 1947. And that was the main means of transporting goods between the lodge at the summit, Mount Roberts, and what was called the dump, which was directly below the steep summit where they, dumped goods when they came up. So because of lack of an easy mode of transport up there, and of course they had no electricity for refrigeration of food, the lodge needed to be fairly self-sustaining as possible for visitors and workers. So they started up a veggie garden, which was established on the only flat land on Mount Roberts, adjacent to the pump house. Well, the pump house was to get water into the lodge area from, yes, up the hill. But where was that water taken from?
The creek, Bellbird Creek, actually.
Bellbird Creek.
Sort of just above the tea house way.
Yeah,
It works it into the gully, and that's where they had to in the pump.
They pumped it up from there.
Yeah.
So that became the Garden Trail. There was a character called Old Bill Muller, who used to also make trips on horseback down the eastern grassy slopes of Mount Roberts to a well as well as that pump, to a tributary on Bellbird Creek to manually carry water to the campground. So that happened before the pump was put in, I guess. And then eventually, later on, they purchased an old World War II truck, which allowed for easier transport route to the pump house. So that's the Garden Trail. Now, the Census Trail and the Lodge Loop, which tended to go together. Okay, so in 1975, Tony Groom I think he was the oldest son of Arthur Groom. There were 3 sons, Richard, Tony, and Don. So anyway, we spoke with Richard. Tony's still around, but he went to visit Yellowstone in 1975 and saw their trail, which was designed for people with disabilities. And he thought, we should have that at Binna Burra. So he designed and constructed a 1K track for visually handicapped visitors. And there was a sturdy rope which people held on to. Here it is here, still there. They had metal braille plates along the track, quite a few of them, explaining descriptions of plants, the trees, insects, the birds, and the sounds that people could hear. Obviously, for visually handicapped people, they would be using all their other senses. So that was important to include. And they responded very positively to the experience and actually requested that they extend the trail, make it a bit longer. And there was a chief gardener at the time, Perce Bishop. He extended the trail around the steep northwest corner of Mount Roberts. You recall where the lodge was, it dropped off quite quickly, but the trail went around there, and that became later known as the Lodge Loop, but it was continuing on with the census trail. And it became so popular even with sighted visitors that they allowed people, sighted visitors, to go in blindfolded along the trail and hanging onto the rope and so on, to see if they could rely on their other senses as well. So that was an interesting addition to the use of the census trail. So that was Vinda's report. She looked into all that, the history, and again, I think the idea eventually will be, when they make the new brochures with the new maps that Philip and Vinda have created, on the back of the brochure, they'll have some of those stories, the history of the trails that Vinda has dug out. Now, some of you visited Binna Burra and heard from Tim Medhurst. When was that? Sometime last year, I think, about their plan, and it is very comprehensive and a new. It's got lots of things. There's that adventure precinct down here. So they're actually leasing a whole area of Binna Burra land to a company to develop various adventure sort of experiences. One of which will be a what's it called, a luge, one of those slide things that they have in Europe, not with snow, of course, but with water or something, and more sort of treetop walks, and also there's a camp going in here, a sort of more of a high level adventure camp that they can do harder walks, and some cliff, what do you call it? Sort of not. That's it. Thank you, Via Ferrata on the cliff side here. So it's not there yet, but that's the plan, and you can access the plan on their website. So the project, our collaborative mapping project, did document the conditions of the walking trails, those 9 trails, as I said, and did identify some potential new tracks for the new planning the future of Binna Burra. There's still, I believe, quite a lot of work to do to open up all the tracks again. And Steve Noakes very kindly commented about our project. This is a wonderful and worthy report of the students that will be referred to for many decades to come at Binna Burra. It is hugely appreciated by Binna Burra. And both Philip and Vrinda, you may be interested to know, received grades of 7, the highest possible, for their course, the work that they had done. And well deserved, I think. Now, if you're interested, the full report is available on our website, and you can find it there. The Binna Burra Trails Mapping Project under, I think under projects, and then you scroll down to scientific studies, and all of the scientific studies are there, but the top one is the Binna Burra one. And there's some other references there, and Harry Throttle's book as well. So that's it. Thank you. So any questions about it?
What is the freehold land area in about?
It's the area, the private land. There is a boundary. Oh, and size-wise,
Yeah.
I don't have a figure. Do you know, Neville?
No, I don't, because they recently, or after all the fires, some of it went to main roads and everybody. They chopped off a lot of land and sort of gave it to the main road, particularly where they were working to stabilise the cliff line and things like that. So they did reduce the area, but the actual acreage or hectares, I don't know. Have to look up that sort of thing. But it's probably, I'm stabbing at the moment that it's probably maybe half of the original area from the original block 178, which goes right back to.
If you know the area of that.
I could have to look at it. I got the plan at home, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah. So, but all of the, the facilities that you see, the tea house, Groom's Cottage, started those other walks and so on, that's all on Binna Burra land.
Well, it has to be.
Yeah, all private land. Yeah.
Raf,
Len.
have they got any funding from anywhere as far as grants or other funding to re-establish any of those
Trails?
historical trails? Or what?
Yeah, I don't know about the Friends of Binna Burra. They do a lot of volunteer work on the trails. With the funding, you may be aware that the Queensland government treasurer gave Binna Burra, I can't remember the figure, but enough to rebuild the lodge. And that happened last year. And it was interesting because the treasurer, Cameron, had spent quite a lot of family holidays up there and was quite, keen on getting Binna Burra back on sort of with a new lodge. So they certainly got funding for that. I don't know if what they've applied for to actually do work on the trails now, but they do get quite a lot of volunteer help from the FOB, isn't it? Friends of Binna Burra. Yeah. Mary?
We have to get contractors to make a lot of those tracks very heavy work.
Yes.
They have them on the road side of the mountain.
Okay. Yep.
And bring a lot of appropriate rock at the edges of cars, the surface of the car,
Yeah.
etc.
Oh yes, there's quite a bit of heavy work, as you saw from the condition that the trails were in. There's quite a lot of things that have to be removed, and particularly for the census trail, if they're going to make it wheelchair accessible, they'll have to put some hard surface on that too. So
Yeah.
that will mean heavy work, equipment and so on. Yeah, not just shovels. Yeah.
I don't know how, like the census trail, wheelchair friendly, you might know, you've been to O'Reilly's, it'd actually be made as a boardwalk. So that's easy to push wheelchairs along. But so what the economic cost comparing boardwalks to, walking paths with dirt underfoot, I don't know. But the timber one at O'Reilly is really good, leading to the Sky Bridge thing, and I pushed a wheelchair around that, and even along the suspended bridge, I was able to push a wheelchair around that one time, So it is an option, I suppose, which they may be considering, I suppose, for future cost. And a lot of elevated walkways are in protected areas in some places now, like swamps and stuff. So you're not actually, digging up the swamps. So they tend to go for some elevated boardwalks in places. But I don't know the idea of the plan, but no doubt, I think the money's going towards the lodge, and then if there's anything after that, maybe, I don't know, it will then go towards the other structures.
Things.
But,
were there any questions on the Zoom, people? Oh, thank you. Okay, well, it's
So
nearly,
How many tracks now are open? There were only two when you.
there were only 2 last year open tracks. I think some of the others are open now, not the census trail certainly, because that was the one that had the landslide. Not sure, well, Caves track is open because you guys did the walk with Bob. No.
Down to the Sky Lodge is pretty rough, but you could get.
Oh, the Sky Lodge, walking to the Sky Lodges is fine also. That's open. It's
Well,
a
you can
very
walk down the
short.
road to these tiny houses, you know, you can actually walk down the road that goes to those and get the good view out over Bellbird, which looks down the Nummaba Valley and across to, you know, Shipstern and Springbrook beyond that. So that's accessible. But as far as some of the old walking tracks and the old horse track, as Rafferty mentioned, you know, the growth that came after the fires everywhere, really, you know, there's quite a lot of weed and everything underfoot. So, yeah, a bit of work to open that part up. You can access Bellbird by going, you know, down the road past the little tiny houses that they put up there, sort of thing.
There's a road now. They put in a road
Yeah,
to the
right.
tiny houses, so you drive down there if you're staying there. And I think the price to stay in the tiny house is about the same as the Sky Lodge. Not cheap, but that's the luxury sort of thing, experience, I guess. They've still got you can still camp at Binna Burra, but it's smaller. It's a small area, but you can do it in the camp area. And they've also got the safari tents, which again is middle sort of range accommodation option. They've got quite a lot of those. Very nice in summer. And they've got nice views too across the valley. Yeah,
From the tiny cottages is brilliant.
brilliant. Oh,
We
you
had some friends stay there.
yeah, yeah.
They loved it. They said it was really lovely. So,
Yes, I think it will be. Yes, you're not allowed to do barbecues there, obviously, for the fire risk. But they do have that barbecue option for dinners at the groom's bar. So they often do a barbecue there, don't they?
If you want to have a look at the area where those tiny cottages are, where are you supposed to park? Because if you park at the top, you might have to walk down the road, or maybe
You can drive down and have a look. You just want to have a look.
Drive straight and there's parking area.
If you're staying at the tiny houses, you're allowed to, you know, take your vehicle, but normal day trippers and everything can't go down that road. That's, you know. But if you're going to be staying in the tiny houses, yeah, and the road is
But how can you go down and see them if you can't?
walk
You can walk down.
Walk down the road.
walk down the road. Yes.
Which is what they don't want us doing.
Oh no, it's not that walk. No, that's not the road they don't want you walking. It's the road back from the caves walk that they're a bit worried about. People walking back. You know,
They don't mind you walking down the road.
well, that's a private
That's a
road.
little private road.
Private
Yeah, it's not,
road.
it doesn't have all the traffic coming up like from
Yeah.
Benchmark Way. Once you're nearly up at Binna Burra, the last sharp corner, a road goes in there, a path in a road, and it goes down to Bellbird and to the tiny houses.
Yeah, that's a
Right,
private
which is not
road.
on the main road, you know, coming from the information centre up to Binna Burra.
Mm.
Is this private?
So again,
Sorry.
or not?
yeah,
Oh,
right
yeah,
in the
yeah,
corner,
yeah.
right in the corner.
So it's not all that far to walk from the main hub area, tea house, down to the tiny houses. Yeah, you can walk down.
So it's a wide verge on the side of the bitumen road that you can walk down from Groom's Cottage
Yep.
down to the turn off to the tiny houses near where the sewage plant used to be.
Okay.
There's a couple
Thank
of
you.
room there. You could get 2 or 3 cars on that little flat area and then walk down. I was wondering if you were cheeky enough to drive down, just quickly have a look.
Have a look.
2 minutes and come back again.
Yeah, I suppose so.
You could.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, it's the bit of the road.
We'll have to go together. Ron.
Yeah. Well, Ron's still got his second prize up there.
Yeah,
haven't
use
you?
that sky, actually.
He's used his first prize. He's going in second prize
I
now.
have been banned from this year's.
No, he isn't banned. And the voting again will be via members online, so not the committee. But just quickly though, that the road that they're worried about, Mary, is the end of the Caves Walk one, back along the public road where it's quite busy. Yeah, up the steep
So
section.
one of those, Philip,
Mm.
his third plan,
Yeah,
it looked much better.
it was much better, but longer.
150K. I mean,
Meters.
It's not that far.
Yeah,
because
that's
the-
right.
The
Mm,
wheelchair road over at O'Reilly's is only 900 meters,
yeah.
and that is beautiful. And
Mm,
you have a few benches along the way.
yep.
Yeah,
and
the
it
major,
goes
the
through
major problem,
lovely rainforest.
the major problem is the soil there, Mary. That
Mm,
whole cliff line, it doesn't take much weather and it's landsliding.
Yeah,
So that's the major
Mm.
stumbling block to try and build a track which has got,
yeah.
the recommended walking grade. So that's probably why it might never come off really, because it would be, major engineering basically
Mm.
to put it, because that the steepness of the slope. But I agree, 900 meters is nothing to sort of to walk it sort of thing,
Mm,
but it's the geology is the problem going to be
yeah.
there sort of thing. Which,
So it'll be interesting to see what they eventually do with all this, and hopefully very soon, next year, all of the trails might be open again.
yeah, and the census trail was always very popular,
Mm,
as Rafferty said, and even before Percy built the track there, one of the ladies in their bushwalking club was a teacher at the blind school at South Brisbane. So we used to take children up there for weekends and take them walking, and it was amazing to take blind people even on the track. You'd be coming along a track and there's a breach and they would duck. They would duck,
Oh,
would you believe, without you saying anything. I mean, without you saying anything,
oh,
some of their senses were, just sort of so alive. And one older guy, we used to take him abseiling, actually. He was blind. He was totally blind. But we used to take him abseiling,
oh,
So,
wow.
so the senses are there. So it was a great walk for people to walk around blindfolded, if you were, as Rafferty said. So it was a short, easy walk, but a good way to sense the forest, and the birds and the sounds and everything around the park. So, yeah, I hope that's probably their first preference when they get rolling, for people to enjoy the mountain sort of thing.
I think the census trail will be one of the first that they want to get back and make it wheelchair accessible as well.
No more question?
We're past our time, I think.
Okay, thank you, Rafferty. Marco is on. I hope you've already put your $3 or more in the barrel up there. Thank you, to keep our kitty kicking up, sort of thing. So that we sort of need that, particularly coming to our Christmas little party. Thanks to Rafferty for that. I got a lot of good memories from the mountains going back from years ago. So enjoy supper and have a good chat. Thank you, Rafferty.
Thank you, Neville.
There's two options for paying for morning tea.
Can you listen for a minute?
Two options for paying for morning tea, and we've been sort of deliberating over this for some time. Could you put your hands up if you'd prefer to pay online?
When you register.
When you're ready. Because you can't, you haven't